Thanks everybody for joining on a Thursday afternoon. I'm sorry to hear about all the weather going on in Northern California, but I'm happy to be with you on the East Coast. We started out our week at 2 degrees in Virginia, and today it is 70 degrees. So kind of an interesting weather pattern we've got going for us across the country. My name is Susan Barrett. I am an implementer partner with the Center on PBIS, the National Technical Assistance Center, and I work specifically with the Mid-Atlantic PBIS network and direct and lead the effort for the Mid-Atlantic states. And so as part of my role in the center, Lucille Eber, Bob Putnam, and I have been working on an alignment brief, and we presented that information at the most recent National Technical Assistance Forum back in October, and we have since updated that slightly, but Michael was part of that audience and wanted me to share kind of the lessons learned and some of the steps and the technical brief with you all in California. So I have a lot of slides. I have a tendency to talk really fast, so Michael is going to interrupt me if there are questions. I would like this to be as interactive as possible, given that you guys are all on mute, but hopefully we will go through the content and have a little bit of interaction here. If there are things that I bring up during the slides today, you can always email. I have listed that at the bottom, sbarrett@midatlanticpbis.org, and we'll make sure that you have the slides available to you and the actual brief with the self-assessment and the worksheet so that you can use this in guiding your work at the district or at the school level. So I'm going to make a couple of assumptions that you all, as part of the PBIS coalition, know what PBIS is and are working with a district leadership team or in the capacity of a leader within the district that's implementing PBIS. And so this webinar is really going to focus on the overall alignment of the different various projects that you're working with under the umbrella of MTSS or PBIS. And I will use those terms interchangeably because I see that as kind of the guiding operational framework for being able to provide the necessary skill sets and promote social emotional health and well-being for all students in our schools. So the purpose of this webinar is to go through a really specific step-by-step process of examining current initiatives, practice, and efforts that you have going on across the child-serving units, whether that's community mental health providers or education units. We really just want you to know or be aware of the current projects that are going on, the way they interface and connect or not connect. And then after we go through kind of an examination, we're going to ask that you consider their effectiveness. You know, a lot of times we are tasked with doing multiple initiatives at the same time, but we don't have the necessary fidelity or impact data that kind of gives us information relative to whether or not they're being effective. We're also going to consider the way that some of these initiatives might be redundant, or they might be competing against each other for time, space, resources, training events, and when that kind of occurs, there's this lack of confusion and lack of implementation fidelity because we're just trying to take on too much. And then finally, the purpose of this webinar is to kind of go through ensuring that you as leaders and change agents are really putting forth this notion that our district leadership teams need to establish an ongoing routine for this continuous review process. And when there are new initiatives that come into play, there's a very formal selection process and criteria that we have put forward to ensure that we aren't continuously adding initiative after initiative and depleting the resources and not really being able to do anything well. So that's the purpose of the webinar. I want to start with this little quote. MTSS, or that multi-tiered system of support, serves as the operational structure to install any practice or innovation. The trick is not to overwhelm the system with too many innovations and to be very selective. So again, this just kind of ties into the goals and outcomes that we're going to describe today. So I've given you kind of a peek into this technical guide for alignment, and I'm going to focus specifically on the self-assessment guide that's really going to break these items into a step-by-step sequence of events that you're going to go through with your district team. So it's really meant to be used at the district level implementation team with people that have the authority to make some big changes in the way that they've organized their initiatives. We're also going to be referencing an alignment worksheet, and again, all of these resources will be available to you. They are hot off the press. We've been working on kind of a beta test over the last couple of months and really testing them out with different sites, and we have our final version going up next week. So you'll still see in the documents that I'm sharing with you today the draft watermark in the background. So these are literally off the press. So let's start with a step-by-step process. We're going to start talking about kind of this assessment piece and portion, and really making sure that we've got the right people that we've gathered around the table to coordinate and lead the alignment process. So we're really talking here about getting the right people at the table, meaning that this is the executive level or cabinet level team who have the authority to change budget, policy, procedures, professional development calendars, roles and function. They can reassign staff. So these are the kind of game changers, the cabinet level people that need to be here, need to have some information around implementation science, have experience with implementation science, and really kind of provide that authority to change and shape the way that we move forward with building those formal routines out. In addition to that group of people, we also need individuals with detailed knowledge of the current initiatives being implemented in your district, right? They are the ones that can tell you where the hiccups are occurring or where the strengths are occurring. They've got demonstration sites that they can describe examples, and they really have detailed knowledge in that they know the day-to-day management and operations and training that can guide some of the conversations that you'll be having as you use this guide. The next thing we want to focus on as we bring this team together are organizing the communication feedback loops and making sure that the demonstration sites, schools, and the schools that are implementing the various initiatives that you're going to be describing are present and that there's a continuous loop. So we really just want those feedback loops in play as we go through the alignment process. Now, I'm talking about the alignment process as if it's just one meeting. This is really a continuous improvement, and it's going to take some time and effort. And we want this to, again, be a formal routine that the district leadership engages in. So really having that communication feedback loop between the implementers and the people that are at the cabinet level, and having that direct communication link is going to be really important. So we need to schedule meetings at least monthly. Now I know full well we're not going to get the executive leadership team there on a monthly basis, but again, if you have the right kind of communication sharing platform, hopefully you'll get them there to the extent to be able to own this, to understand what it is you're trying to do, and leverage the necessary resources to make it happen. So step one is really about coordinating and getting the right people at the table. Step two is about defining the valued outcomes that are to be achieved. Now with school systems and around the country trying to implement Every Student Succeeds Act, and really this whole notion of the reform effort for whole child approaches, and really kind of merging under the umbrella of MTSS, it's really going to be important to come back to the vision and valued outcomes for the children and families that we're serving, and really defining those. For the purposes of this webinar, we're going to focus on just the social emotional behavior initiatives for alignment, but knowing full well that we really need to pull in those other academic content initiatives and design that common way of work and common approach. But for today's examples, we're just going to focus on social emotional behavior. So let me give you an example of some of the ways that valued outcomes are seeping into the fabric of the policies, statements that are getting put forward. We're seeing new language around mental health that's exciting under the umbrella of PBIS or MTSS. And I want to share some examples of the way it's kind of infiltrating into the system. So this is an example of Vermont, and it's a state Senate resolution. And I'll just read you the items in red because I think this is a pretty cool change that's occurring in this state, in which the General Assembly, the political unit at the state, has now a commitment that mental, physical, and nutritional health of our students and their caregivers is addressed with the same level of attention and concern as is our students' academic and cognitive achievement. So this shift has really allowed the leadership team, the executive team at the State Department to really work on and shape out the alignment process, because the policy has charged them with this kind of whole child reform effort, and knowing that they, in order to get the outcomes that they seek, they really need to look at how they interact and connect with one another. And then at the bottom of this policy, it states that the General Assembly declares Vermont to be a state in which equity, caring, and safety, both emotional and physical, are evident in all of our schools' practices. And if you talk to states that have similar policy that's shaping this work out, they are describing the sense of kind of having a seat at the table, right? And having having a voice and being able to kind of steer folks in this common way of work approach. So it's some pretty exciting things and reshaping that are going on. I'll give you one closer to home from California. This actually comes from Tacoma Public Schools in Washington, and they have switched their valued outcomes to be much more whole child focused. And so in addition to knowing how to read, write, and solve math problems, whole children are also socially strong, emotionally resilient, advocators, and self-determined. And whole children know how to build quality relationships with each other as critical thinkers and learners. So this is also another place where we're starting to see policy really shape out that formal alignment process. And I'm sure you guys have examples in California where you're starting to see a lot of money get allocated towards mental health and wellness. And it's going to be really important that as we have a seat at the table as social emotional behavior providers, or that we're shaping this under the umbrella of kind of the systems reform that we've been delivering in PBIS, right? So we've got this knowledge base around California that's very familiar with scaling up initiatives and very familiar with what it really takes to train and coach and support schools to implement with fidelity and to be able to sustain that. And so how do we connect the work that we've been doing in PBIS, that you guys have been doing around California, to a larger construct called MTSS, and really start to connect this way of work and thinking about how we're using academic content initiatives and other initiatives that are getting a lot of traction, like trauma-informed care, equity, restorative practices. How do we then kind of help them coordinate all of this work so it's doable and that we're focused on what our kids need from us? So we started with step one is getting the right people at the table. Step two is really identifying those valued outcomes. Step three is getting that inventory down of the related initiatives that are currently being implemented. And you guys are probably familiar with doing this at the school and the district level, maybe by something called resource mapping or working smarter documents that you've done in PBIS. But without the right people on the table having this conversation, usually it just ends up being a mapping activity, and we just kind of say, oh, wow, we're doing way too much with way too little resources, and we don't ever eliminate some of the things that aren't having the impact that we want for our kids. So having those the right people at the table and having this conversation side by side with them is going to be important. So within this step, we've got a couple of things that we're going to focus on. One is looking at related grants, initiatives, practices, innovations, and just doing a brainstorm dump of all the different things that are transpiring with respect to social, emotional, and behavioral health and well-being. We want to look at what's happening in our educational units, but we also want to look at the larger community and what some of those child-serving agencies are also delivering. So we know we bump into each other. We want to make sure that we've got a wider range of folks that are helping our students be present and be able to talk about what they're doing in out in the community. We want to clearly identify the population that's being served. So is it all, few, some? Is it high school versus elementary school initiative? So you just want to be really specific about what the initiative is related to and who is getting served. You know, some of our initiatives are serving just the adults, and there are some wellness initiatives going on just for the caregivers and the staff in the school. So we want to be really clear on who's actually getting served with these grants and initiatives that we're choosing to align. Item B goes into looking at the department or division who has the budget authority. This is going to go back into that executive teaming logic and making sure that we have the right players at the table. So we know that whoever is in charge and has budget authority over these grants or over these initiatives are going to be the ones that can say yes or no to this alignment process. So we want to make sure that we're really explicitly clear about who's got the budget authority. Next, we're going to go into research and whether or not there is scientific evidence for each initiative that you're reviewing or identifying. Again, too often we've been caught up in kind of the soup du jour kind of thinking or this next big thing or a magic fairy dust approach, and we haven't really taken the time to review the evidence behind why we should make the type of investment we're making with various initiatives. So we need somebody at the table who can look at the research, that can examine the peer-reviewed journals and really say that this is a good match for the students and youth and families that we're serving. So we're going to have a conversation around the research to determine whether or not there's evidence for the current initiatives we have on our plate. And then finally, during this step, we're going to look at the expected outcomes. Are we getting results to date for the initiatives that we're describing? And so to help kind of think through some of the things that you might be doing, and again, you've probably seen these slides as when we're talking about resource mapping and we're kind of doing that, that initial kind of audit, all the different things we're trying to do in schools. I was working with one school system and they listed 414 different initiatives. I mean, that's just unbelievable, but we rarely take anything off of our plate. And so at this point in time, we just want you to do kind of that brain dump and brainstorm all the different things that we're trying to accomplish. And then we want to start to really organize this information. Too often we will call out a team as an initiative, or we'll call out a process like oh, we do function-based assessment and behavior intervention planning, and they're calling that an intervention, when that's just the process that installs in intensive intervention. So we want to be really careful as we do that brain dump to start to really organize this maybe along the continuum, or maybe this visual that you're looking at here has those items organized by data, practices, and systems. So any way that you can start to really take that information and start to really organize it. This last example I will show you for this item is the new worksheet as part of our technical alignment brief. And once you kind of determine that there's some redundancy and you're targeting specific initiatives that you want to align, this worksheet might be really helpful in organizing the items I just described in one kind of document. So we've got, again, initiatives. You're going to list the initiatives across the top, and then you are going to plot out the department and division, the population served, whether or not it's research-based, and what the outcomes that you're trying to achieve to date. And so this, again, will really help organize that initial mapping or audit process. Okay, I'm just going to assume you guys are with me. Step 4. So this is going to go into the core system features of PBIS or MTSS that you're targeting for alignment. So you're going to see the core features listed out here. So the specific team-based leadership and the coordination, is that being taken care of for each initiative? What are the fidelity measures that are currently being used? What are the core practices? Have the outcome measures been identified? And this is really where you start to lose people. You'll start to see huge gaps in a lot of these initiatives, and they can't tell you what fidelity measures they're using, or there hasn't been an outcome measure that's been identified. We're also going to talk about comprehensive screening measures, and we're going to talk about the extent to which professional development plans and coaching and building local capacity is being used for each initiative. And so as you go through this step, we're going to come back to that worksheet to be able to, again, list your initiatives out and then get into some nitty-gritty details about the core features, the core system features of these initiatives. So this will help you kind of have that conversation, construct kind of the gaps in what you're seeing, and then start to make a plan for alignment. Okay, so the logic here, and this is the fear, right? When you start to do this, you all of a sudden realize that there are multiple teams and multiple individuals at play. There could be multiple fidelity measures, right? There could be multiple ways that people are getting screened, and that there are multiple training activities that are going on with each initiative. And what we quickly learn is that while we're investing in all these initiatives, we're actually buying a whole lot of bikes. And so one of the things we're trying to do is convey to this team, this executive team, that we just need one bike, right? We just need to agree on a common way of work, and that the logic gets applied to all, but we shouldn't reinvent the wheel, so to speak, every single time we have a new initiative. We shouldn't assign it to a brand new team. We shouldn't, make it sort of be a separate box. And so I wanted to just kind of give you a graphic, thanks to Don Kincaid out of Florida. I love this because, as we're trying to install MTSS and PBIS and have people understand what it is, I think this graphic organizer really comes down to having one common way of work and making sure that we're just pumping up the tires for some schools or changing out the tires for some schools, because at the end of the day, not all schools are going to need all these different initiatives, and we really need to match the needs of our schools and the populations that we're serving to these effective interventions, and not think that one size fits all, but that common way of work does fit all. Another way, if you're a visual learner, another way to kind of think about this or construct it is that MTSS are the core features or your way of work. So really having your executive team be able to walk away from this alignment process, knowing implementation science, knowing that the core features generalize across the board, and knowing that this can adapt to fit any kind of district, urban, large, small, and that this common way of work allows us to put in different practices based on need. A lot of times we like to throw out this notion of evidence-based practice, and I want us to start really getting a lot more concrete about what are the skills that are going to be acquired as we think about the different practices that we want to take place in our schools. So again, just another graphic organizer that hopefully is helpful as we're teaching a wider range of people what this core feature PBIS thing is, and that we're really just trying to change out the practices and not reinvent the wheel every time we have a new initiative. All right, so this is an example of a worksheet that was completed and I just wanted to kind of share some of the lessons learned as we went through this with the district team. So when we started doing resource mapping, the team had decided that they just really wanted to hone in on 3 specific initiatives because those were the 3 that seemed to be bumping into each other the most with respect to trying to get training days and kind of the popular initiatives that were going on in the district. So they chose PBIS, restorative practices, and trauma-informed care. And fortunately, the Student Services Division was the budget authority that was charged with implementing this across the district. So in some of the districts I work with, PBIS is in special ed, and that could make it more complicated. But for this district, they were all being coordinated through the Student Services Division. And so when we started to kind of unpack these initiatives, the folks in the room that were familiar with PBIS and who were charged with implementing PBIS in the district could quickly run through the systems features that were in place as they were implementing PBIS, and they could identify the specific core practices. And they were using the tiered fidelity inventory, and they were really quick to say, here are the outcome measures. When it came time to do that same thing for restorative practices, we have some blanks, and same for trauma-informed care. There really wasn't a systems features, core features conversation that had taken place yet. And granted, these were very new initiatives to this district, but they really were at a loss as to the systems features that guided the implementation. They could tell us core practices, man. They had that down, which was really exciting. The other blanks you'll notice is that they couldn't tell us what the fidelity measures were, but they could tell us that they were going to be focused very specifically on outcomes. And so what they decided to do, rather than form a separate restorative practices team and a separate trauma-informed team, they decided that they were going to use the PBIS team to guide the work across all of those initiatives and use the systems features across all of those initiatives, but then have specific work groups in the district for PBIS or for restorative practice and for trauma-informed care. So they changed the way that they organized. And so the feedback loops and the communication worked out really well because there weren't 3 different leadership teams to go to in order to implement. They all were coming back to a common approach, a common way of work, and they didn't reinvent the wheel. So this was done in a really good time because, again, restorative practices was new to the division or district, and trauma-informed care. They also made the decision that they were going to stick with a tiered fidelity inventory, but that they would do really short checklists for each of the practices. So if they had a coach go in to observe a classroom meeting, they would have really simple checklists to check off to make sure that that classroom meeting was being conducted with fidelity. So again, really good time in terms of doing this alignment process, noticing the gaps, but also not buying more bikes, right? Sticking with the same bike and the common way of work to install the systems features that are required across the board. Okay, so the worksheet that I've given you as you move through will help you as you put in the initiatives you want to align. We're going to ask you to go through that same process that I just walked you through. So we're going to ask you, as you look across the targeted initiatives to align, to look at commonalities and differences in the core features. We're going to have you analyze the potential overlap. I know a lot of our PBIS sites in the Mid-Atlantic region are moving from calling their team, their leadership team at the district, from PBIS to the climate team, or they'll call it the equity team. As long as the roles and functions are the same, we're happy they're not adding one more team. We're happy that they're enhancing or modifying the name of the team, but using that common way of work. We also want you to examine areas of conflict. We do have some initiatives that are walking side by side with PBIS that are much more focused on exclusionary practices, reactive or contraindicated practices. We want to make sure that those philosophical conflicts are being resolved at this executive team that's talking about alignment. We want you to review items that are left blank, like for instance, there was no fidelity tool for some of the initiatives, or there was no clear plan for coaching support and performance feedback. We want you to review those items and make sure that you're having a common fidelity tool, but we don't want to make it so burdensome that there's a fidelity tool for everything. So really kind of figure out how you're going to assess quality of implementation with some of the practices you're asking your schools to do, but walk that really fine line of not overwhelming them with too much. And then determine things that can be eliminated. Now you would think that this would be really easy. You're looking at this grid, you're saying to yourself, wow, we're not getting any results to date. The funding's going away, and people are just hanging on to this initiative, right? It's really hard to eliminate. And when you think about from a superintendent level, that makes sense because they, if a crisis or something occurs in one of the schools and it was just shown that you eliminated a huge initiative, that could have political ramifications. So I understand why we don't want to eliminate anything, but at the same time, if we don't, we're gonna always compete with each other and never be able to do anything well. So as you're doing your mapping, you're organizing your initiatives, you're targeting areas where you want to align, I think this worksheet can be really helpful in having you kind of assess and evaluate where the gaps are and then make a plan for moving forward with alignment. So here's where we really use the self-assessment to analyze and make some decisions about where we can eliminate, where we can kind of bridge together the initiatives through a teaming process, and really assess the risks for alignment or some of the value add in alignment. So step 5 is really going to take you through that nitty-gritty, and the worksheet will help you accomplish that as well. Finally, in step 6, we're going to design the plan for effective alignment. So here's where we're really going to identify the common fidelity tool, to put together a professional development plan that's blended and integrated and have a master schedule. We're going to have a common way by which we make sure we're building local capacity and coaching support and performance feedback. So in step 6, this is really going to all come together, and we have, here's some examples about what our executive teams are doing as a result of going through this step-by-step process and really kind of figuring out a different way of work. So I have one district that's changing the organizational chart to reflect MTSS as the leadership team, and then all other initiatives are forming work groups underneath that, that executive team. We're using a similar agenda process, and that has been really helpful as we strengthen our communication and feedback loops for ongoing decision making. So everybody's using a modified district level team-initiated problem solving agenda. So we've modified the TIPS agenda. So if you're familiar with doing TIPS inside your school teams, we're actually using that for districts and states now, and that similar agenda process has really been helpful in those communication feedback loop mechanisms. The executive team in one of my districts has now decided that anytime they decide they're going to select a new initiative, they're going to go through this process to select anything new, and they have made a promise to eliminate one thing before adding something new. And then another example of a next step is developing that communication, really working on that dissemination plan and having a broader range of stakeholders really be identified to engage in this process. So here's just a range of examples from different places that we're starting to use this alignment process with. It would hopefully be helpful as you guys move through this self-assessment and the worksheet. Another thing I want to start to show you some examples about what it looks like and sounds like. So if you're in charge of training for your district, I know I've probably broken every rule in PowerPoint and put way too much in a slide, but I wanted you to see some of the ways that we're integrating our professional development. We've been implementing PBIS for many years, similar to probably what you guys have been doing inside California. And as we're assessing the schools and the needs of the students and youth that we're serving in our schools, we're realizing that we need to track schools differently. So in the example that I'm showing you right now, we've got a training series that is track 1. And all of those schools that are in track 1 are just getting started with PBIS implementation. So they're going through the very first kind of core components of Tier 1 implementation, and we have designated them to be in track 1. We've got other schools that have already moved through some of the basics of PBIS, but need some enhancements. So you can see if you follow that green arrow all the way down, those schools are being tracked to receive enhancements around the following topics, like bully prevention and restorative practices. And they're doing it in the context of their PBIS training so that they're aligning their specific enhancement practices to the core features under track 1, which is really helping them see the connect points and not developing a separate team outside of the PBIS school leadership team. Other schools are tracked at track 2 and focusing in on Tier 2 implementation, and they might be in the beginning stages, and then we'll move them through enhancement around changing role of the clinician and modifying and layering up to social academic instructional groups. So if you follow that yellow arrow down, you can see some of the enhancement efforts that are going alongside track 2. And then finally, we have sorted some of our schools into track 3. So this just kind of gives you a sense of the way we're kind of aligning our training series so that, and we have a common approach. So all trainings are conducted in a team-based platform, so teams that represent their community stakeholder group are there, their core leadership is there, a coach is assigned to the school, so all the PD is really run in the same way that we've been running our PBIS efforts, which is exciting. Okay, so I'm going to go into, it's one thing to be able to look at the balcony view of alignment and work side by side with your executive district level team on this kind of macro level thinking. But I think it's also helpful to have you all see what it looks like and sounds like as our schools start to use the MTSS or PBIS logic and how they're installing SEL, social emotional learning curriculum, how they're installing bully prevention, restorative practices in their climate efforts within the context of their PBIS efforts. So I want to share some specific examples. Now, we're all familiar with using the teaching matrix. We've been using this for many years in PBIS. Most of our schools have specific overarching, positively stated expectations. So in this example, we've got respect ourselves, others, respect property. We've got the settings that go across. We've got the rules, and we've stated it in a positive light. So a lot of our schools, as they start to expand and enhance implementation for PBIS, are also enhancing the way that they're using the teaching matrix. So rather than starting brand new, they're actually expanding the rules or the specific behaviors that you'll see inside the grid. So let me give you some examples. So in addition to specific behaviors we want to see in our teaching matrix, we're putting and installing our social emotional skill curriculum inside the teaching matrix. So whereas before in our safety expectation, we would primarily focus on the behavior we'd want to see, like keep hands and feet to self, in schools where our kids are expressing through our universal screening protocols and other surveys, when they're expressing being concerned about friends, we actually have and modified the teaching matrix to talk about, well, safety in our school also means that we tell an adult when we're worried about a friend. Under the respect category, yes, the behavior, we want to use signal to ask a private or public question, but we also want to look out for everybody and make sure everybody gets a turn. So we're really just building, capitalizing on the social emotional curriculum that's getting installed, but putting it into the context of the teaching matrix. So we're moving away from specific behaviors to really pro-social skills. And I'll give you another example. This is an elementary example that started to use the climate survey and other focus groups that led them to really changing up how they organize their lunchtime period. So rather than have one kind of central place to have lunch, they have now a flexible lunch. So for those kids that like to be in the cafeteria and can handle the noise level and handle kind of the stress level of being social, they can go to the cafeteria. They also have an opportunity to choose a quiet lunch area in specific designated classrooms around the school. So as a result of getting information from the students and the families around stress, they realized that lunch was an area of stress for a lot of the kids and families, and because cyberbullying was taking such shape and social media was taking such shape inside the school, they realized that lunch was becoming much more of a stressful environment, and so that's why they modified the lunch environment. They also decided in the teaching matrix to incorporate other replacement strategies and behaviors in the context of the matrix. So under respectful in lunch, they are going to be cognizant and help support inviting those who are sitting alone to join in. Teachers are pre-correcting right before lunch about making sure everybody's got a lunch plan and whether or not they're choosing a quiet or social lunch area, and they're making a plan to invite friends to join them. Under the responsible category, they are putting in and teaching breathing techniques and practicing that right before lunch, and putting and installing emotional regulation strategies in. So they've got a whole listen to my signal strategy that's been taught that they have incorporated into the teaching matrix. So this, I just wanted to give you a really practical example of some of the surveys and focus groups and information coming in that's playing out in the PBIS effort and how they're aligning other practices inside the teaching matrix. So we're moving way beyond behaviors, and we're putting in social skills and replacement strategies for managing and coping with stress. Another example, a middle school example, again, climate surveys are going out. We're doing a much better job of getting the pulse from families, community providers, and from students. And so I want you to, again, think about another lift to the expectation grid. And in this situation, the students were saying that the teachers needed to have roles and responsibilities when it came to these expectations and supporting use of these. And so the students were saying they did not feel safe in the bathrooms, and they did not feel safe as they were having transition in the hallway, and they really needed the staff to step up and guide them around supervision and interacting and being present in the doorways and in the hallways during transitions and in the bathrooms. And so while they could have easily had the climate survey and the climate team kind of go off and do their own thing, they were really smart about incorporating the feedback from the climate survey into an already existing effort that lend itself to broad use of this by teachers. So again, really smart way to kind of align their climate and PBIS effort. Another example, the school had installed a bully prevention protocol, and you guys are probably familiar with the one out of our center, the Stop, Walk, and Talk bully prevention program. And again, rather than have it sit outside the teaching matrix, they've put this inside the teaching matrix. So this is now serving and providing as a prompt for staff to remind kids to use this protocol, to model it across the day, and really line it up with a teaching curriculum that was already in place and being utilized by a large number of staff. This is another example of school level integration and alignment. This school was determining whether or not they were going to use restorative practices. Their risk ratios were out of control. They knew they needed more equitable practices, but they didn't have when they did surveys with folks, people just couldn't handle one more thing. So they decided to really explicitly link restorative practice efforts to the framework of PBIS, and I thought this was a really smart way to do that. Folks were really familiar with the systems data practices slide, right, and they were familiar with that problem-solving logic that we use throughout our PBIS effort. And so as a way to have folks see this lining up with the PBIS effort, they worked with the team and the staff to identify the data set, to identify the SMART goal. In step 3, this is really where the rubber hit the road in terms of having the restorative practices skill really be connected to what they were doing with implementation at Tier 1 and Tier 2. So this notion with restorative practices and PBIS is we're always going to promote and prevent first. We're going to have an inclusive culture and climate. We're going to develop caring connections. We're going to teach expectations, rules, and routines, and develop the acknowledgement system. But we're going to use the morning meeting to set the stage for doing that and delivering that each day. And then when behaviors do occur, we're going to teach how to be accountable through those morning meetings, and we're going to teach how to repair harm so that kids and staff and community members have something to restore back to. And then they're going to use the professional learning design that was constructed by the PBIS efforts to continue making sure that we're building local capacity, that we're using data to monitor progress, and that we are teaching staff necessary skills that they need that are required to support the restorative practices. So again, a really hopefully practical example at the school level of how different initiatives are lining up and how they're using the MTSS system core features really to make that happen. So I wanted to give you a Tier 2 or layered daily progress report example. For those of you who have been doing check and check out, you know that one of the ways that students are progress monitored is through a daily progress report. So I want you to notice a couple of things here with this progress report. It is designed for a group of students who are in a social, academic, instructional group, a coping skills group. They, because the teachers are all used to progress monitoring kids on check and check out, they kept the same daily progress report. It's anchored to the school-wide expectations, but for the kids who are receiving instructional coping skills within a targeted group are getting this modification of a daily progress report. So under the safety goal, this group of kids are getting help labeling their feeling and using their deep breathing exercises. And again, they're practicing this in the context of the targeted group session. And now the daily progress report will help generalize and maintain and help the staff support implementation and use of these skills over the course of the school day. So again, just another way of thinking as we're lining trauma-informed care, we're lining up anxiety, because we're starting to see that as we screen, a lot of kids are exhibiting internalizing features, and so this is really going to help pull out being able to progress monitor these replacement skills and strategies and connecting it to things that we're already familiar with and designed through the tiered implementation model. Okay. So let's go macro level again. Let's go back to thinking at the district level. And again, I will take another pause. Any questions about those examples, Michael? Anything in the chat room that I need to be aware of?
No, there's been some discussion about follow-up and a lot of information, but I let them know that you and Kelly will be supporting us through a webinar series throughout the coming year.
Yeah, this is a lot to take in, and I realize I'm throwing a lot at you. But we kind of wanted to give you the whole big picture, and then, yeah, we're happy to kind of break this into chunks and kind of go through it at a slower pace. Right. So when we come back to the macro level, again, we're finding that a lot of our districts are skipping the whole evaluation plan thing, and so it's going to be really important to bring us back to having us construct an evaluation plan along the initiatives we're trying to align. So this is an example of a district-wide evaluation plan that we've built off of the evaluation blueprint from our center. And we've added a couple of categories and a couple of things here. So in this example, we've got the context and input. We have a master training schedule now. We have evaluations of the different training events, and we've got a common approach to professional development. We've decided to keep it to 3 different fidelity measures from a self-assessment perspective, but we also have identified an external evaluation for a subset of our schools through using SET and ISET. So rather than do SET and ISET through all of the schools, we're going to look at 20% of the schools. We've added screening. So a lot of our schools are using natural data sources to screen. And as we move into having more formal screening metrics, it's going to be important that we're keeping track of the different measures that our schools are investing in. And so you can kind of just get I'll just do a really quick glance. This is just wanted to give you kind of that macro lens of an integrated and aligned evaluation plan that we're using. And it's building off things that you're probably familiar with within the PBIS effort. And then I think this is one of the last slides. I've got the aligned professional development plan. So I wanted to give you an example of, kind of going back to that training series example. I wanted to give you kind of a scope and sequence of the different activities that our teams are going through, and the evaluation component, when it's occurring over the course of the year, and who the audience members are for participation. So again, this draws into our work with PBIS, with restorative practices and other major initiatives, and we're having one aligned professional development plan that the budget authority is charged with doing, and there's one master schedule. So everybody's aware of the training events, they build on one another, and there's a common approach to it that includes coaching and performance feedback measures. Okay, so I did that in record time. I probably went through it very too quickly, but I know it's getting late on a Thursday. And again, happy to go through this at a slower pace, happy to dissect it a little bit more. And as Michael said, Kelly and I are going to be continuously working with you through the year. So as questions arise or as you're reading over the technical brief and any of the worksheet or any of the examples, we're always available to answer questions along the way.
And do you have anything else to add, Susan?
No, it's just really great to be with you this afternoon. Thanks for having me. We're excited about this.
And thank you. I know it's much later for you, so I appreciate it. And we'll see all of you in March for the Implementation Science webinar with Dean Fixon and colleagues. Thank you so much for coming today. Great. And we really appreciate everything that you did for us today and the support that you're giving us. I have a few folks who wanted to be counted in on the future workshops and the ISF kind of cohort series that we've been putting together. So we're real excited about that. Just please, I'll take your names off the chat room and send you an email. If you don't get an email from me, email me your information and I'll make sure you're on that next cohort. It's a slightly different webinar series than what we're doing here with the PBIS Coalition webinars. So just know that you might not see it pop up on our events page and things like that. And I'll offer up to those of you who are left, if there's any further questions, write them into the chat room. We have several individuals who want to be included in the cohort series, it looks like. So that's very exciting. And any final questions? Not seeing any. So just want to reiterate, we have some exciting events coming up through the PBIS Coalition, the conference in October, Desert Mountain Sulfa supporting the ISF webinar, or I'm sorry, IMTSS, too many acronyms, IMTSS training in San Bernardino area. The high school symposium next month. If you haven't signed up for it, bad news, it's sold out. So we're very, very excited about the high school symposium. It's our second annual. The next year we'll expand to 2 days and some larger space to accommodate everybody. So we're grateful for those of you who are going to that.